Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to the Econobox garage. Come on in. Now, one of the things I need to do before I can put the wiring in is to put the dash together. Now, before I can push the dash together, I have to recover it. And before I recover it, I have to get rid of a lot of the old contact cement that was on here. Now, what I'm using to help me get the old contact cement off is just some camping fuel, a couple of rags, and just doing a little section at a time. And you can see I've already done pretty much all of this end. And I just have the end here where all the gauges go. So I'm going to get back to work on that, and then once that's done, I can recover it. So there we have the dashboard all cleaned up of the old adhesive. When I first got the car, this was covered in what I considered an ugly brown vinyl, which had been changed at some point in time from the original blue. So when I peeled that off, of course, it left a whole bunch of that residue, which is what I just cleaned off. So moving forward, I'm going to do a final clean on this, and then I can get the cover, which is just over here, and prep both pieces and get those put together. Well, I left off last week's episode with a messy garage, but I spent a couple of hours and did some cleanup. I've got my table all cleaned up here so I can get to work on the dashboard, but that's coming up later. My workbench is greatly tidied up, but having things cleaned up quite a bit will make things be easier to get things done moving forward. So I'm going to spread some paper out on here and then get to work on the dashboard. Well, here we have the dashboard. It's been cleaned up on the outside surface and cleaned up as much as I could on the inside without affecting any of the writing on here. So just to give you a recall or a recap, this car was originally iris blue, as it indicates here. The H indicates it had a heater, a rev counter, a windshield washer pump, and a miles per hour speedometer. This number here matches the chassis number that's on the tag on the left side chassis leg. And this number here, the 32, other than matching the last two digits of the chassis number, I'm not too sure what that signifies. So if you have any ideas on that, let me know. I'd greatly appreciate it. So let's flip this back over. So this is where a radio would have gone. I'm not going to bother with one. So there's a hole here and a hole here. That's for the passenger grab handle. And if I remember correctly, this is for the starter button. This is for the windshield washer pump. This is for the heater. It's the ignition. Choke goes up here. I think that's it. I'll confirm all that before I start putting stuff back in. This is where the combo oil pressure water temperature gauge goes. Rev counter goes here. Speedometer goes here. Fuel gauge goes here. The indicator light for the signal lights goes here. And the steering column goes through this hole here. Yeah, this hole here is for the turn signal switch. So that's the metal part. And this is the covering I'm going to be putting on it. And I picked this up as part of a kit from Bugeye Guys. Included the cover for the dash itself. And another piece that I'll use to cover the cockpit trim that goes across the front. Then it also came with a bunch of the clips that are used to hold the cover in place. Now I understand this originally would not have been glued, it would have just been clipped on, but most of the information I've seen moving in this kind of work has it actually glued in place. And to help hold it in place while I'm gluing it all together, I just have a bunch of these bulldog clips that I'll use around the perimeter to do that. So first things first, I'm just going to make sure that the dashboard is nice and clean. Then I'll get some adhesive sprayed on there, and then I'll get the cover itself into position. Well, here's the adhesive I'm going to be using to attach the vinyl to the dashboard. I've got an old wallpaper roller that I've cleaned up. It's nice and smooth. I'll use that, and then if necessary, I have my heat gun that I can just use that to soften up the vinyl so I can stretch it to where it needs to go. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got these bulldog clips set ready to go. This is the same adhesive I used when I did the door liners, and I'll put a link to that video up in the top corner here for you. Well, it's not perfect, but I'm really happy with how this has turned out. The front face is nice and smooth, and around the bottom here is as well stuck. Did have to do a bit of crimping and nip and tucking around this part here. That's about the worst part, but you end up not seeing this anyway. And then it's good and tight across the top, and again that just tucks up underneath the scuttle panel anyway. And come around to this side, and I might have to do some touch-ups on this end, but all in all, I'm quite happy with how that turns out. It's recommended with that adhesive to let it set up for 24 hours or so. So I'm not going to start cutting holes or anything. I'm just going to let this sit and let the glue cure. I've got to, and so I'll start getting the gauges together. But I think before that, this is the cockpit trim that goes across the front of the cockpit. So looking along this trim, around the holes, there's some little ridges on some of them, and some old glue residue that I'll have to get out of there as well. I'm just going to use an old, this is a file I bought when I was a kid, when I was making car models. It's a fairly fine file, so I'll just knock the edges down around these holes where necessary. Yeah, this one's pretty bad over here. So I'll get this all cleaned up, ready to accept the new vinyl cover. And you can see there's some glue residue on the back here. I'll see what I can do about getting that off before putting the new stuff on. Well, I thought I would try this CRC gasket clean to get rid of the old adhesive on the back of the trim here, and it's doing a really nice job. So I just spray some on, and I'm using what's left of my little brass brush here, and it's bringing this off quite nice without leaving any film or anything. Just wipe it down with a microfiber cloth, and it's good to go. So I'll put a link in the description below as to where you can pick that up, and I'm just going to get back to work, finish this off, and so I can move on to the next step. Well, this trim piece is cleaned up quite nicely. I've still got a couple of spots where the adhesive was fairly heavy, but I'm really happy with how that side's cleaned up. And then the back side went way quicker than I thought it might. That brake, or that gasket remover, worked like a charm. I'll just clean this up with either some steel wool or Scotch-Brite pad. I'll get some adhesive on it and then get it covered with vinyl. So I've traced the shape of the trim piece onto the vinyl, and I figured that this amount here is going to be right about the correct amount of overlap. So what I have also got is some masking tape about that width. So I'm going to run the masking tape around this line all the way here. It's going to be a little, just a tiny bit short at this corner. But anyway, I'll run that masking tape all the way around, and I'll use the outer edge of that masking tape as a guide for cutting this piece of vinyl out. Well, there I have that masking tape on all the way around the perimeter, and then I'm just going to cut around the outside of that masking tape, and that should give me plenty of vinyl to work with. I have the vinyl cut to the shape I want it. I'm going to get some glue on here, some glue on the trim piece, then I'll start getting those two pieces together. Okay, well I've trimmed a bunch of the excess off this edge here. I've cut out for the mounting holes. There's one here and one here. There's one in the top just up here. I've also cut out the steering column hole just to figure out how to do it best. And I'll show you how I do that in a minute here. And there's just a couple of spots I'm going to have to re-glue, and there's this one here. There's a little bit over here, but I'll go around the whole thing and just make sure all the edges are properly secured. There's another spot just over here. I'm still going to try and fiddle around with this edge here on both ends. And basically, this part here will still show, because basically this part here does show. Everything from here up is tucked up underneath the scuttle panel. And basically what I'm doing with to cut out the holes is I'm taking the sharp blade. I think I'll actually put another blade in there, and then just going around and using the side of the hole to guide. Right, actually there's a spot I can trim there. A spot that I can trim all the way around, and just so that way it keeps it nice and tight to the edge of that hole. So next up, I'm just going to use some dollar store foam brush and my heavy duty contact cement. I'm going to go and re-glue where I have to around the perimeter here, and at the same time I'll get the glue set up on the front trim piece. Now I have the vinyl glued in place on the cockpit trim for the front of the car. I'm going to let that sit up for a while. I'm going to get to work cutting out the holes for the switchgear and gauges. One thing I'm not going to be doing is anything with this spot here. This is an allowance for a radio. Not putting that in, but I need to do these two holes here and all the rest of them across the face of the dashboard. So what I'm going to use is a fresh blade, my utility knife, and use the perimeter of the hole, the metal, as the edge to just guide me around. None of these edges will be visible, but I still want to make it as neat as possible. And there we go. So there I've got all the holes cut in the surface. There are 2 for the grab handle, starter switch, signal indicator, the ignition switch, washer pump, heater, wiper switch, choke, and the steering boss, the signal light indicator, and then the 4 gauges. There's also the mounting holes that go to the braces, one here and one here. And then there's these little holes here which are for the switch that controls the dash lights. So very happy with progress on the dashboard. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that and you'll get notified when the next video comes out. And that next video will be installing the gauges and switches in the dash. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.